Yeah, man, it's great to meet you. And I want to begin our conversation with what we went through for the last 3.5 years. How did you get through the pandemic and how did it change you?
Well, so the pandemic was part of an awakening. I actually started writing a series of essays that started in January of 2020, and I actually published them at the end of 2021. And I called it Essays from a Pandemic, and the subtitle was "And a Spiritual Awakening and a Whole New Life." So for me, the pandemic was sort of the external representation of upheaval and disorder and the breaking down of systems and things that was a mirror of what was happening inside of me as I went through this significant personal transformation at that time. And so that's kind of more on a spiritual side of things, I guess you could say, or consciousness side of things. The other aspect of the pandemic is that it affirmed a saying I've had for a long time. I grew up on a cattle ranch. I grew up a hunter, a backpacker, outdoorsman. And so I've had this saying for a long time that nature kills pretense.
Yeah.
Nature does not care about your belief systems, your ideologies, any of that stuff. And what I saw was the pretense of stability was exposed. And finally, I marvel at, I mean, there's obviously the tragedy of all the deaths and the tragedy especially within our country, of sort of this weird divide that it lengthened this divide that we have, that I think is less about political differences and more about reality differences. But at the same time, it showed the resiliency of the human spirit. There was that Spanish actor who decided to, because he was staying with his elderly grandmother, and decided to live stream conversations with her, and she had millions of followers. And there's so many different examples of how people took that time and used it to serve and grow and create. And that, you only do that stuff really when you're challenged.
Yeah. I find looking around that there's a level of me that's like, wow, we all made it through this because we all saw some things. There's a level of just, because this didn't just happen in one part of the world. I mean, it
No,
happened
right.
to all of us everywhere, and every single thing that we did was altered. So there's a level of resiliency and hopefully growth that we all went through that just makes maybe us moving into a more enlightened era of humanity, so to speak.
Yeah. And it seemed to, Joe, enhance the enlightenment of some, or the consciousness level of some, and also enhance the lack of consciousness from others.
Yeah.
And the lower consciousness. And again, it's showing this very strange, like I said, reality divide between how various people experienced the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it also showed that it's tough to be in charge of anything. So that's why I live in Texas. I'm not a Greg Abbott fan at all, but I think he did the best he could in Texas, because I'm not a governor and I've never had to make those kind of decisions. The same with, being the CEO of a big giant company. And it showed that it takes leadership is a crucible.
Yeah.
And there were moments from the Biden administration to the governors to businesses of, really good leadership on how this was handled.
And I think that's the thing that I realize about my childhood. No matter what political lines or whoever it was, it really is important to have a leader that instills confidence and calm and warmth into the people. It's huge.
Right.
So that's one thing I will never ever take for granted again.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of elementary school kids, second, third graders. It's career day. And one of the little ones looks up and says, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
It's funny you say that, because when the work I do, I ask that question is, what would you say to a 10-year-old about
Yeah.
what you do? So now I'm challenged to say it back.
Turning the tables.
Yes, turning the tables. So I would say to that second or third grader that inside of you, in your heart, where you feel feelings, where you feel love, or maybe sometimes you feel anger, is a uh, a job for you to do in the world that somehow everyone will benefit from that. And I help people find out what that is and build a life around it.
So, what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
I wanted to not be there. I've always I've always been a bit of an escapist, especially as a child. I grew up in a religious cult, a Christian fundamentalist cult. I grew up in a very violent home, and I spent many hours gazing out the window at the mountains, going, I'd rather be there.
Yeah.
And but from a career standpoint, probably around that time, I've always been fascinated by how things work. I think around that time is when I thought I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, um, or something to do that where I could invent things.
Yeah.
So
So let's hone in on this path that you're on. Where were you born and raised, and what were some of the fundamental seeds that were put into you to want to help others?
yeah, so I was born in October of 1970 in Oregon. I spent my first 22 years in Oregon, and as I mentioned, I was raised in a fundamentalist cult. That would be the best way to describe it, and on a ranch. And so I had this very weird split life because at home it was violent and oppressive, and um, but the ranch life was liberating, and my relationship with my grandmother in particular was a saving grace in that time. And so I had these sort of shapers of me, both from the positive and the negative, more the negative than the positive, but still it was there. And um, underneath that was empath, this empathic person that just felt everything deeply. And my name is Justin, which is the root of that is justice. So I had a sense as a kid of injustice. I could see it. So, and I loved history. So I remember, like when we played Cowboys and Indians, I always was the Indians, and I would argue with people about why Custer deserved what he got. Like I was that kind of kid that argued about history. And I was mystified. I'm still mystified by the veneration of the Confederacy, considering what they stood for.
Yeah.
I remember when I was 13, I read this big, thick book about the Holocaust. I was obviously horrified. And this deep sensitivity to injustice, which in many ways kind of went into an incubator because I didn't pursue it right away. What I wanted to first do was liberate myself. So that's what I did. I moved out when I was 17 and never really looked back. It wasn't until years later, right around the time of the pandemic, actually, that I had this reconnection to that part of me that believed deeply in justice. And really, it was George Floyd's murder that sparked that, like reawakened that, like, oh, wait a minute, this is a familiar feeling. I'm
Mhm.
just in a very different place now than I was obviously when I was 5 or 6 years old.
So, who's been a hero for you? You obviously had to have grabbed onto some pretty magnanimous people to be inspired, but who was a hero for you?
What do you mean, like from a historical perspective or people I knew?
Just probably either or. I mean, the Venn diagram can blur, but whoever really contributed to you being who you are today.
Yeah, I think, with people that I actually knew, my grandmother, Maxine Foster, was a huge influence on me in so many ways. I had a, 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 a there was a minister in that church who was kind of an outlaw. Like he didn't, within the side of the oppressive insular system, he was sort of an outlaw. And John Sterling was his name, and he was a big influence on me. And that really was it as a kid. I didn't have many positive influences, but I had a bit of a hero complex. So I had these certain heroes that I loved, and I would read like Louis L'Amour, the Western author. I'd read all of his books. In fact, my oldest son Logan is named after a Louis L'Amour character, Logan Sackett. Or I read about historical figures like Francis Marion, the
Yeah.
swamp fox who fought the British in the Revolutionary War, that the movie The Patriot sort of loosely based on. Um, I read about Harriet Tubman. I read about Gandhi, these other like what now we call history shapers, and I saw them risking everything in order to follow a conviction, and that was deeply impressed upon me by these various people.
So if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
Um, I would say, I like to challenge people. I like to debate. So I wouldn't be necessarily somebody that I would get inspiration from. It would be someone that, what it would be Mike Johnson,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Speaker of the House. And I don't know if I can't remember if this podcast is rated R or not, but I would have some choice questions for him,
Good for you.
especially around the idea that if Jesus was in the role of undercover boss, what would he think about that? How would Mike Johnson respond to that?
Yeah,
And I find him to be kind of this symbol of the great threats to consciousness and liberty in our country.
I agree.
And I would want to sit down with him. And I'm very good at talking to people I disagree with in a way that it doesn't start a fight.
Yeah.
And I would love to do that. That would be interesting. I wouldn't want to do it with Trump because there would be there's no there. It's like trying to put a nail in jello. But I think with somebody like Mike Johnson, at least I could have a conversation with him and say, hey, what are you doing here?
There's still probably a light on in that house, no matter how far away Mike is. But that light in Trump's house has been dark for a long time.
For a long time, right? And there's no, I mean, you take someone that is fully consumed by narcissism, um, and I think someone like Mike Johnson is fully consumed by theology, and Christian nationalism, but there's still a little spark in there. I think I could kind of get a
Yeah.
little thread I could start pulling on.
Yep,
So,
absolutely. So speaking of, kind of motivations, what is that for you every day to get up out of bed, to live the life that you live, to help people? What is that motivation for you?
well, I have tattooed on my right arm "Love More." It's a heart that my younger son Caden, and who's a professional artist, designed it. And that's really the thing, is that love is a verb, love is action, and that starts in my own home with my wife and my stepson who lives with us, and then my grown kids and our extended blended family. And in recent months, it really, that love more has been extended to what I do for a living. Virginia and my wife and I started an advisory firm, a coaching firm called Massive, which is specifically designed to support and equip business leaders who want to take on systemic change. And that is sort of the waking conviction every day. There's a shadow to that of doubt, but there's also the fire, the fire that won't go out, and what I call long passion or long purpose. And that's all kind of rooted around this idea that as what I call a SWAM, a straight white American male, is that that things are not going to change with people that look like me as bystanders. I have a t-shirt that says silence is not an option. And that conviction of using those elements as platforms, if you will, to go make people uncomfortable that are also SWAMs, I think about that every day.
I've said this a few times and you may appreciate this, but I do jazz radio and I remember right around the time before it's probably like May. We were all swimming through this pandemic trying to figure it out. So I started doing more interviews. So I would go on iTunes and find new jazz artists. And I found this young man and I sent a note to him. And the next day he comes back and he said something along the lines of, thank God this was meant to be. I just sent like 350 notices out to all these radio people, and I didn't send it to you, and you reached out to me.
Mm,
And his name is David Billingsley. He's in Minneapolis, and he's a pianist. He's a really great guy. So we interview, and he was ecstatic. We had a great interview, and I released it. And I released it the day after the George Floyd murder, and
mhm,
he lives up there. And I started watching all of his posts on social media, how bleak and Meyer was. And as you can attest, at that time, there was a real wakening up of a lot of minorities that needed to happen. That said, I'm done. Okay, I'm not playing this whole placating thing anymore. And I felt it. And I remember him at one point put a note out and said, I can't even go into my Target right now because that's the Target headquarters and that's where he lived and that's where Floyd, that's where everything happened. He said, it's looted. I don't know what I'm going to eat. And I just felt his desperation. And I called him the next day and I said, David, I'm just some white guy in Kansas City that has a radio show and we convene. But I'm telling you right now, you better stay in this. Do not give
mhm,
up. Your light is going to inspire more people to ensure that this Floyd thing doesn't happen anymore. So you can do what you want with this, but I'm telling you right now, I want you to just hear me and just understand you need to keep it going. And he wrote me his CD. He wrote a huge long note on it and sent it in the mail
mhm.
a week later and said that was a pretty big thing for him. And
Yeah.
those are things, like you said, with the t-shirts and things. We have moments where we can say, you know what? We have to help these people that are doing good work. And unfortunately, the forces in our society are in a bad way, man. And we know that. But if we can do
Mhm,
our little part to help people spread the light that need it, because there's so many little kids that he influences through his music and
mhm.
urban renewal that need that. And if he
Right.
decided to say I'm out,
Yeah.
it's not going to be okay.
Well, and Joe, I think the same thing applies even in with us as just white dudes, that the things are not going to change if we're silent. If we just
Yeah.
sit by and go, oh, that's your thing to take care of,
Yep.
is we collective, I mean, we really are people that look like us created this system. So to separate yourself from that is it's why like Eli Wiesel, the Nazi hunter, said, the opposite of love, the opposite of hate is, or the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of what that um and you could take any issue, take any social issue, any social pain, and that when you try to explain it away, you contribute to its perpetuation.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also similar to another conviction that I have was after January 6th, because that they kind of bookended. I mean, they weren't exactly, because Floyd's murder was I think in May, like you said, and then the pandemic fully spiked, and then the election, and then January 6th is like that thing, the very essence of what we need to preserve in order to create systemic change was under attack.
Yeah.
And that was like, holy crap, man, this is now my system is under attack.
Yeah.
And I can't be quiet about that.
Yep.
I can't be someone that's like, well, that's just the other side, or this is a difference in politics or a difference in policy. No, it's not. It's a difference of morality.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Absolutely. So, of all the things that you've done and overcome in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of?
Oh man, you and your good questions. Um, Coincidentally, I have another tattoo on my other arm, also designed by my son, of a lion with 3 arrows in it and holding a banner that says "Be not afraid." So I'm gonna take that and say, not necessarily most proud, but the top three proud things is, one is that I integrated my childhood trauma. I integrated it. I I didn't run from it. I don't think you actually heal from it, because
Yeah.
I think it's evolutionary, and in evolution, pain is integrated, not, you don't necessarily heal from it. That's number one. Number two is walking away from things that no longer serve me, no longer
Yeah.
serve the interest of my soul. And there's a long list of those, but they're significant.
Yeah.
Um, and then the third one was the basically getting to know my own mind and tendencies. The work I've done with consciousness and thoughts and emotions. And, when you think you are your thoughts and emotions, you are your own prisoner. You're a prisoner of your own mind.
Yeah.
And that work to liberate myself from the social conditioning and the trauma conditioning of my own mind has been extraordinarily painful to do, but also extraordinarily liberating, to be able to basically do something I didn't know was possible, which was learn how to be happy.
Yeah. So everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your clients, colleagues, but you are in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I'm a soul first. I can't remember who said it originally, but we're not humans having a spiritual experience, we're souls having a human experience.
Yeah.
I think it was Wayne Dyer, but it could have been somebody else. And so I first identify as that, as a soul, and that I am a trichotomous creature, is that I have, I'm an animal, I'm a mammal, um, with a soul and with a neocortex.
Yeah.
And so that's the human. So I identify as a human. And then I identify strongly with the masculine, not even really related to gender, as much more related to energy, the
Yeah.
masculine, and that the role of the conscious masculine is to be a protector, usually of other people's autonomy. And I very much identify as that protector, of justice, of rightness. Um, and then within that, there's certain roles I identify as a father and a husband and an entrepreneur and a, author, poet, things like that. But those are more roles that kind of define how I operate in life. But the deepest identity is a human soul with a calling.
So if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one event in human history with your own eyes, where are you going?
Uh well, it would have been pretty cool to know Jesus back in
Yeah.
the day. That'd
Yeah.
be awesome. I would do that. I would for sure. Seems like that would be on the list. But really what I want to be in the moment, because um I don't know how to pronounce his name, but that's the author that wrote Sapiens.
Yeah.
He talks about these, and he's an atheist and a scientist, and he talks about these moments in history that make no sense. There's no scientific explanation. For example, why is there all around the world, deep inside of caves, basically the same paintings with no interaction between them?
Yeah.
And what I would like to be there when humans reached a level of consciousness where they started to create,
Yeah.
started to make art, started to make music. So you go way back to cave paintings and drum beats and dancing and all that. I'd like to be there in that moment where we started to actually understand that that's part of what we're here to do. That would
Yeah.
be cool.
That would be cool. What a nexus moment. So anyone out there that wants to learn more about you, reach out to you, hire you, see your work, where can they go?
Best thing to do is go to massivechange.co and you can look at our website, and from there you can go to all of the places to learn about me. I'm also very findable on Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm at Foster Thinking on Instagram. I write a lot of poetry and musings that I post there. So, but best place to go to learn about me and my work with my wife, Virginia, who's my business partner, massivechange.co.
This has been such a pleasure, man. What a titan. Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure. Keep spilling the light into the world. We need it.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. You for creating the platform.
Yes, sir.